like to think we all have some type of kinky side to us, and it could be extreme or it could be not so extreme. So one of the things that is really important is when you are having conversations about sex, and these conversations should be happening even before you have the first sexual encounter. Understanding what you like, what you don't like, what are off limits, what are on limits, what types of your body do you like to be touched, what types of your body do you like to be kissed.
Welcome to the Asian Dating Podcast. I'm your host, May Bugenhagen. I am the founder of Two Asia Matchmakers. I originally started in Los Angeles, California, and today I help men all across the US find a lovely Asian woman. So if you're a lovely Asian woman out there who's educated, kind, fun, and want to meet a great guy, please look for my profile at twoasiamatchmakers.com, and hopefully you can register and fill out a profile so I can find you. So every week I have two guests on my show, and today I have Christina Morelli, who is a relationship and personal coach working with individuals and people in partnership to create healthy, rewarding, fulfilling relationships. Her practice is all about fostering self-awareness and providing the relationship education and skills we were never taught. The mission is to educate the world on how to increase relational and emotional intelligence, overall happiness, and personal healing. Welcome to the show, Christina. How are you?
Thank you so much, May, for having me. I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I know you're in North Carolina and I am physically in Colorado, so we have a little bit of a time zone difference. But thank you for joining me on the show. I know there are so many things we could talk about, but will you tell the audience a little bit about how you got started and what you do and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. I have been coaching on relationships for a little over 8 years now. Started as a passion project because I believe so deeply that relationships can help heal our deepest wounds. It's just we are missing the education piece on actually how to do it. We were never formally taught how to have relationships, and to have really strong, healthy relationships requires skills that can be developed, very similar to how we develop skills for our career, and support people in that way to help grow their relationships, expand them, and have really evolving, liberating experiences within partnership or even relationships with family, coworkers, whether it's platonic or romantic. So yeah, like I said, I've been doing this for about 8 years. I do have a private coaching practice where I do work with singles and people in partnership, essentially to get ready for relationships, or if you are currently in a relationship, how do you get aligned and in sync with your partner so that way you can have the relationship that you've always wanted and dream of. And that's what we do. We work together to establish your dream relationship and make it your reality.
I love it. I love it because on this show, we're always talking about dating, like, how do I get the guy? How do I get the girl? But after that, or during that, when someone's in a relationship, they could really use some coaching still, right? It's not like we get a lot of coaching and advice from our friends and family. And sometimes we don't want to ask our friends and family those things. We want to talk to someone more neutral who maybe have more experience to help us work through some of the stuff. So I know you've been doing this for a while and it's your passion project turned professional project now, and this is your lifestyle and your career now. But how are some things that I know a lot of people have a tough time initiating sex or talking about sex, and I know that's always a very, very common question, but they don't really talk about it, right, with their friends and family necessarily. So as a professional, how can someone initiate sex that feels fun and is easy and won't feel like they're getting turned down?
Yeah, well, getting turned down is inevitable, so we are going to cover that. I just want to make a quick mention of something you said a little bit ago of like, sometimes we don't want to go to our family or our friends, and it's oftentimes because they're not necessarily have the healthiest models or relationships themselves. And that is another aspect of why I'm so committed to the mission of like teaching how to have healthy relationships, because what we know is based off of the models we've had, which is usually from our caregivers, and the idealistics around from the media, like TV, movies, etc. But a huge part, going back to your question about like initiating sex or anything relationship related, is really all about having the conversation, setting the standards, having the expectations, having agreed upon expectations, not assumed expectations. You know, initiating intimacy is really scary for a lot of people, especially as what I find really interesting is sex when you first start dating somebody is so easy, but for some reason, as the relationship goes on, becomes harder for a lot of people. And I chalk that up a lot to the hormones that are released during the different stages of relationships. But really, it's like, what is so scary about initiating intimacy? Is it the rejection? Is it the vulnerability? Or do you just have something physically going on with your chemical makeup that is lowering your libido, for example? So I would say the first place to start is what types of conversations you should have, and doing some own internalizing of, why am I, one, maybe not interested in having sex? Why am I resistant to initiating it? Do I expect someone else to initiate it? How do I initiate it that feels really good for both myself and my partner? So taking into consideration what your needs are as well as your partner's needs. So that way you have a really cohesive, easy approach to initiating sex.
So what are some examples that people can say or do to initiate sex?
Well, I would like to first point out the wrong way.
Okay, let's talk about the wrong way.
So I don't know if you've ever heard of the boob honk, right? So you just like walk up, let's say you walk up to your wife or your girlfriend and she's doing the dishes, and you come up behind her and you just start like grabbing her boobs, and she's like, whoa, I'm not in the headspace for that. And the other thing to consider is the difference between how a man's sexual drive is initiated and ignited versus a woman's. And a man's can be lit like a fire, right? It's just like you strike a match and they're good to go. Where a woman is more like a pot of water that is on a stove burner, and it's like it takes time to warm up. It takes time to get it to boil and ready to receive and be open to and like have those like juices flowing in a way that they can actually relax and surrender and be in their body and be in that moment and be very present, where it's usually a lot quicker for men. Another wrong way that I think is really interesting that people do, which I doubt people would admit, is like dick swinging, where they just like come and like flop around and they're just like, hey, thinking they're joking or being silly, but ultimately it could be perceived as like, want to do it. Asking before considering, right? So being concerned about your own needs and your partner's needs. So don't ask for sex necessarily unless you are fully aware of where your partner is. Making joking comments of like, oh, well, we haven't had sex for a week or however long, or like, wouldn't it be fun if? And then if they get rejected, it's a lot easier to have plausible deniability, like, oh, I was just joking, when really you weren't, and that's okay. But for some reason, it's still really uncomfortable to have conversations around sex, and that should be normalized. It is the most organic experience that we have as human beings. It is a biological need to be able to have sex and procreate. So if we could just normalize the conversations around it. And then when you're taking into consideration, I want to entice my partner to want to have sex right now. Like, you're not going to go to a friend and be like, hey, want to go to this new restaurant? No, you're going to be like, oh, I heard this new restaurant is opening and it has rave reviews. And like, so you want to make it really enticing whenever you are thinking about engaging in these experiences. Oftentimes, people are so used to how easy it is at the beginning of relationships because we have so many hormones rushing through our body, the dopamine, the adrenaline, and that doesn't last forever. That is a part of the different stages of relationships and the neuroscience behind it. So eventually, having sex does require intentional effort. And that is what can help you keep that ignition alive and that fire lit. Any questions so far, or would you like me to keep going?
Yeah, no, just keep going. So did you talk about ways that women can initiate sex as well in your coaching? Do you talk about that? How women can be the person to bring the conversation up and not always let the guy do it?
Absolutely, absolutely. That is a misconception, is like, oh, well, the man has to do it. And that's not correct. Women absolutely can bring it up and have the conversations so people understand like the different standards and expectations that can go into it. So the first thing that's really important is having the conversations even before you do it, or having them, especially when you're not in the moment that you're trying to initiate sex. It's about having the conversations whenever that's not even on the table. So that way you are a clear-headed space. There's not necessarily an emotion involved, but talking about when are good times to initiate, who should initiate, and like the frequency of preferred initiation on both parts. So what you do is you take, let's say person A, they get to fill out these answers, and then person B, and then you find a way to get them aligned and on the same path that fits both of you, is still very understanding and compassionate to your other partner's experience, because nobody's going to be exactly the same in their preferred initiation style or timing, really. Maybe you have a partner who prefers to have sex in the morning, and then you have the other partner prefers to have sex at night. Finding ways to make those work in a really synchronistic, symbiotic way can be really helpful. Another really important thing is understanding your partner's seduction style. What turns your partner on? Sex starts way before any type of physical touch. Well, I say physical touch, but really the actual act itself. There are so many ways that you can start seducing your partner, as long as you know how they prefer to be seduced. So maybe they are someone who's really visual, and you know that they like it when you wear a certain dress or lingerie or wear makeup, whatever the case is, right? If you know that that actually like is a turn on for them, start doing that. Don't only do it whenever you're trying to have sex, because seduction and foreplay starts way before the actual act itself. Or maybe you have somebody who's auditorial and prefers to like hear you say sexy things, or like, oh my gosh, your butt looks so good in those pants. And then you go over and give them a hug or something, without the expectation that it's going to happen right then and there, because then you start to warm them up to and get them in the headspace for it. And always check in with your partner. It is so important that you're consistently checking in with your partner. Even if you are someone who puts it on the calendar, which I know sounds kind of stale, but it really isn't. The reason why scheduling sex, for especially if you're incredibly busy, is because you get to get excited about it. You get to be mentally in the headspace for it. You get to set that container and make it a really special moment. You're not doing it to add it to your to-do list to check off. You're doing it because you want to create a sacred space for you and your partner to enter into almost a vacation for however long you decide to engage. And what does that look like? What do you want included in that? Do you want there to be candles or soft blankets or whips and chains? I don't know, whatever your style is, right? So it's about understanding what your partner likes and incorporating that little by little throughout the day. And that is how you can keep that passion alive in your relationship.
So speaking of chains and whips, what about discovering and being curious about your partner's fantasies and kink? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Happy to. Yes, absolutely. So I like to think we all have some type of kinky side to us, and it could be extreme or it could be not so extreme. So one of the things that is really important is when you are having conversations about sex, and these conversations should be happening even before you have the first sexual encounter, understanding what you like, what you don't like, what are off limits, what are on limits. What types of your body do you like to be touched? What types of your body do you like to be kissed? So when it comes to kinks, this is where you can start very general and then start to get more specific, right? And a lot of people don't give themselves permission to explore that. But when you can create a safe space for you and your partner to have this conversation with no judgment, right? Try to be very aware of your facial expressions and your body language. So if, let's say your partner's like, I really like feet, and you're like, oh, that's really uncomfortable. I don't really know if I want to do that. right? It's really about being like, okay, this is not a personal thing. This doesn't mean if this doesn't fit my personal kink style, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's a rejection or this isn't going to work out. You know, there's so many ways to incorporate aspects of your relationship. When it comes to kink, yes, have a very open, curious conversation. And you can open it up as in, and it starts with like, what are some things that you like that maybe are a little bit alternative or not normal, or I say normal, or things that you would like to explore. Like, what are some things that you haven't explored before that you would be interested in exploring, but maybe never felt like you had somebody you could explore this with? What type of porn do you like to watch? If you watch porn, for example. And those are all great conversation starters, but it's ultimately about making sure that person feels safe to express something that is so vulnerable and oftentimes very shamed, and giving that opportunity for somebody to not feel shamed and to feel seen and heard and valued despite maybe some taboo things that they're into, can really spark a fun conversation, which then gives you more permission to open up and be more vulnerable. And this ultimately provides deeper intimacy for your relationship. And I don't mean sexual intimacy, I mean emotional and mental intimacy.
I feel like it's almost easier to like have some kind of checklist or some kind of fantasy book that you're like, okay, here's a situation or here's different body parts.
Mhm.
What do you think of this? What do you think of that? Like, I don't even think I would know what to bring up, but if I had
Yep.
something to look at or have a list or, like, hey, what kind of porn do you like? Do you like this scenario, or this or this or this? I feel like that's easier, or maybe I never thought of something, but then I might like it. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Are there like books that you can recommend that people can have a
Yes.
guide as far
Yes.
as, yeah.
I have a BDSM checklist that I'm more than happy to send you,
Okay.
that talks about different forms of kink. Just forewarn, some of it is pretty extreme, some of it's not very extreme. And then the other thing I think is really great question to ask is, what are your fantasies? Because when somebody can describe their fantasies, you can pick up on things. So if someone's like, oh, I have a fantasy of like somebody covering my mouth whenever we're having sex, that means probably you like to be gagged or you want some form of restraint, or which could lead to maybe you enjoy some type of rope bondage, for example. Or maybe you have someone who is interested in pain and pleasure, and as they're expressing their fantasy to you, you can pick up on those nuances and be like, oh, this would fall under this category. So let's talk about some things that could fall under that category and check in and be like, how does this make you feel? What is the scale of like yes to no that you're in for this specific scenario?
So you've been doing this for 8 years. Are there certain cultural different types of fantasies that or like different between men always has this fantasy or women always have this fantasy? Are there anything that you can share on that?
Um, yes, it obviously is dependent on the man. There are a lot of men who have fantasies of domination and assertion. And there are plenty of women who have fantasies of being submissive and want to be taken in ways, right? It's actually really interesting. One of the number one fantasies of women, which I read, don't know how true it is, but what I've read is that it's what we call consensual non-consent. Like you're agreeing to have kind of like a forced sex scenario play out. And I found that really interesting to be like, when I was reading this article, that was one of the top fantasies for women. And that doesn't mean everybody wants it, and make sure you are talking about all of this. So I just want to give some disclaimers. Do not just do it. Do not just do any kink without having a consensual conversation and getting somebody's full body buy-in yes to anything that you do.
How would you know if your partner is into kink? I mean, you just ask them like scale of 1 to 10, what's your thought process on kink, and then have them rate it and tell you?
Yes, if you want to be a little more clinical about it, absolutely. But I think it starts with just having the conversation about sex. Like, I'm interested in exploring our sexual intimacy, whether that you already have or having sex with somebody or are thinking about wanting to have sex with somebody. I would like to have a conversation about it because I want to make sure that you feel safe in a very vulnerable situation. I want to make sure that I don't cross any boundaries with you. So I would like to know what's okay with you, what's not okay with you. And the thing that I think is so important to this conversation is so many people say, like, well, does not ruin the spontaneity? No, it doesn't. What it does is it gives you an outline of, it's like, think about it as like a backyard, right? You have a fenced in backyard. These are your boundaries that you get to play in. You can put whatever you want in your backyard. You can add a swing set, you can add a garden, you could have a dollhouse, I don't know, whatever you want. You could have you could turn it into a Renaissance fair for all I care, right? But it's about understanding the bounds that you get to play in, right? So it's not about ruining spontaneity. It's about being able to relax and know going into a sexual session that I know this person's not going to cross a boundary because we discussed it. I know I'm not going to be put in a position where I'm going to feel uncomfortable or want to say no, but then not want to ruin the moment. So I don't say no. And then there's some level of self-betrayal that happens. And then I start feeling weird about it. It avoids so much anxiety that happens whenever you are having sex. And how else can you provide your partner the best pleasure of their life if you don't know what pleases them? And why wouldn't you get the cheat sheet up front and then play in those bounds? And really where the magic happens is all of those little nuances that you get to notice as you are doing the things that they like, right? So instead of being like, does she like me kissing here or here? If she tells you she likes being kissed on the ear, then you get to witness like the change in her breath or the change in his moans or grunts, or how his body is moving differently, or how the rib cage is expanding bigger or smaller, more shallow, pitch of the moans. Like, so you get to, that is where the real magic happens, is all those small nuances that happen within the bounds that you set up front. So back to your original question of like, how do I know someone's into kink? Start with just the conversation around sex. And as somebody gets more comfortable with talking about it, because it is, again, it's still not very normalized to have conversations around sex. We just do it and we hope for the best, usually in trial and error. But when you're having those conversations about sex, then you get to go a little bit deeper, right? You start to gain that person's trust by offering those opportunities to be open and vulnerable in those ways. So then you can be like, I'm into kink. Is that something you've ever explored? Or like, I'd be really curious to explore this. How do you feel about it? And it's just about starting soft and slow and then building more.
So what do you think about, you hear people are in relationships, marriages for many, many years, and they're like, oh, we stopped having sex, 5 years ago, or we stopped having sex 20 years ago, or we only have sex once a year for our anniversaries or something. Like, what happened with those relationships? Like,
That's a very loaded question. And I say that because everything we do contributes to how open we are going to be with our partner, whether that is mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually. So if let's say, I like to talk about modern love languages. So maybe one of your love languages is, my partner does what they say they're going to do. And I don't have to nag them or remind them, right? It's literally those small things that just kill libido and kill sexual drive, right? So if your partner has to put a chore list together for you to manage, or if your partner doesn't feel appreciated for what they're doing for you and the family, all of those things play into the level of vulnerability that you are going to feel comfortable sharing with your partner, because there's it's like death of 1,000 paper cuts in that way. The more small injuries or big injuries that happen to relationships that aren't being addressed, that aren't being repaired, can ultimately cause a complete lack of sexual intimacy in general, because you don't have the emotional intimacy, you don't have the physical intimacy, you don't have the mental intimacy, and also depending on what your partner needs. I'm a demisexual, which means I require an emotional connection with somebody in order to feel comfortable enough to be with them sexually. So if my emotional connection to you is being disrupted, you're not going to have sex with me, essentially. So it's really about understanding what it takes for them. It's not always a spark of like, I'm horny, let's do it. It's that constant intention and mindfulness you're bringing into your partnership that then allows you to be more relaxed, more comfortable, more open to wanting to have sex all the time, and build so much trust. You need trust in order to really have that wild, crazy, passionate, deeply emotionally connected, expansive sex that so many people want and desire. But that requires a lot of other work to be done within the relationship. And I think that's why oftentimes relationships do go stale, is because all the other little things that are playing a part go unacknowledged and unrepaired.
So would you say those relationships that they don't have sex anymore, but they're both okay with it because they're just not very sexual anymore? Like, what percentage of marriages are like that?
I can't give you a percentage, but what I will say is one of my clients just recently this past week, she is 57, 60, and a lot of people have the understanding that once women hit menopause, that they're just not
Mhm.
sexual anymore, or they don't feel the desire or need. And that is just not true. It's about understanding the different stages your partner is going through throughout their life, how their hormones are affecting them. So even outside of the intentional mindfulness that you're practicing within your partnership, a huge part of that is your biological, like what's going on with you. Do you have an autoimmune that makes you feel like shit all the time, so then you don't even have capacity to think about sex? Do you have hormone imbalances? Are you a male that has low testosterone, so then it's, difficult for you to feel sexual or aroused? So those are all aspects of it. But what I was going to say about my client is, she said, I just got out of 2 years ago, I got out of a 20-year relationship, and it was a sexless marriage. It was 20 years. Yeah, it was a 20-year marriage. And then she was like, I'm single and I have never felt more alive. I have never felt more sexual. I have never felt more ignited. And I think there's a lot of it goes into like how we quiet our own voices in relationships, because we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to cause issues. We don't want to hurt the other person's ego or make someone feel rejected. No's are inevitable in relationships, especially when it comes to sex. And a really good way to handle no's whenever you're trying to initiate, one, don't take it personal. Try to understand and be curious about what is going on with your partner that they're in a place of a no. Is it because they're working too much and they just don't have capacity? Is it because it's something that you said a week ago and you guys haven't had a chance to repair it yet? When you can approach it with curiosity and intention in those ways, then you can actually like have the foresight to be able to be like, okay, this isn't personal. But if you do come up to someone and you're like, I really need to have sex, it's been a couple of weeks, I know work is crazy, but I'm dying. I'm so tired of masturbating, or whatever the case is. I just want to be with you and I want to connect with you. And then the other partner has the opportunity to be like, I hear you. Give me a couple of days so I can arrange some things so I can actually put myself in the headspace for it, because I do miss connecting with you as well. I just haven't thought about it because of all these other things going on, whether it's kids, so on and so forth. So it's also providing the opportunity for somebody to get into the headspace and giving them a couple of days to get there, or at least setting the expectation like, I hear you, I acknowledge you, I see you. Just give me a couple of days and I promise we will either talk about this again or I will be ready and rearing to go. So you better be ready Friday night.
I feel like if my partner said that to me, I don't think he'll want to wait 2 days. Like it just feels like that's a weird response. Like he would probably expect to have sex now and not wait 2 days. But you're saying that some people do say that, like, hey, I hear what you're saying. I'll put you on the calendar. Do you know what I
Well,
mean?
not
It
necessarily.
sounds
Yeah, I
so
totally hear what you mean. I think, but it's about being considerate of your partner. Just because you want to have sex doesn't mean your partner wants to have sex. So that doesn't give you the automatic right to demand or command sex.
right.
It can provide an opportunity to pull your partner out of whatever headspace they're in and be like, okay, so it's 6 o'clock. if I can go take a shower and decompress, it's about giving options to get you in the mood
Yeah.
and in the right headspace, right? So if he's like, I want to have sex right now, and you're like, I just can't.
Right.
And then they're like, well, this is unacceptable. First of all, no, you're an autonomous human being with agency and you have every right to say no. But I think what's really important is to give someone an option, like explain where you are mentally, physically, as to the reason why you're not in the mood. Offer an option to start with like helping you get in the mood. Like what would really help is if you gave me a massage, and then I would definitely be in the mood. Or expanding the time frame, like I was saying, like if you just can't get into the mood that night and you're like, I just need a couple of days, I promise you this weekend it's going to be wild and crazy, do that. So it's just about allowing yourself, respecting yourself, honoring yourself while still acknowledging, respecting, and honoring your partner's needs as well. But finding a way to mesh it together that works for both of you. So neither one of you feel like you are lacking, your needs aren't being met, or you are having any form of self-betrayal.
I like that option part. It's like, hey, it's 6 o'clock right now. Do you want to take a shower and I'll meet you at 8? Or
Mm-hmm.
what can I do to help you around the house? That way you're, frees you up a couple of
Got
hours,
it.
like that kind of
Got
stuff.
it.
I feel like, man, if my guy did that, be like, hey, you know what? I know you have the dishes to do. I know you meant to vacuum the whole house. I'm going to do that stuff. You just be ready at 8. It's like, oh my God. Like, yes, let's
Right?
go for it.
Like now I'm
So,
horny now. I want to do it now just because you said that.
right,
You want to
right.
help me with chores? Let's do it now.
I mean, so many guys don't realize that. That's all you have to do is just
Mhm.
do a little bit cleaning around the house. And then the woman's like, oh my gosh, you're so cute. Here,
Yes.
take me. And then you just get naked.
Yes.
So,
Yes,
uh,
exactly. Or while he's doing the dishes, you're like, no, you get naked now. I want,
right,
like,
right,
I'm so turned on by watching you initiate some of the things off of our to-do list.
right, right.
Not
Yeah.
hard to turn us women on.
I mean, I interviewed another relationship coach, and I don't know if his video is up yet. Actually, I don't think it is, but he said something, his point of view was that if a man initiates sex, say yes more than no. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I like that. Okay. Like, so if, your guy wants to have sex all the time, maybe you decline him 10% of the time, and 90% of the time, you really make the effort to get intimate and be emotionally there and have a connection. Because I do
Mhm.
agree that once you have sex, you have that intimacy, the relationship you have and how you interact with each other, it's so much sweeter and better for maybe like
Yes,
48 hours. It's like, okay,
true.
he got some, he's in a good mood for 48 hours. And then I really think that. I really feel like, okay, there is a connection there. And of course, I've been
Absolutely.
married 16 years. I mean, I'm sorry, I've been together with my husband for 16 years now. We've been married for 6, but it's like, okay, what can we do to keep the passion alive?
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
know one of the questions was how to avoid the passion from going out and reignite the fire of a relationship. Like, how do you reignite a relationship if you've been together for so long?
Yeah, I think a part of it is being really curious to the evolution of people, continuing these conversations and check-ins with people, because what maybe did it for you 5 years ago is not what's doing it for you today. So having these consistent like check-in conversations and being like, like not even initiating the conversation, but having enough of an empowered voice that you can say like, this just doesn't feel good right now, or in this moment, because especially with women in the 4 stages of our menstrual cycle, like what feels good to women at the beginning of their menstrual cycle probably doesn't feel good at the end of their menstrual cycle, because their skin is more sensitive, for example, so maybe they need something softer. So there's a big part of just having the conversations and knowing your partner and what they want, and also just like finding ways to create novelty in the relationship, like just trying something new, even if you're like, I'm not into it. Like if you so something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that sex toys are really popular for women and very accepted for women, but not so much for men. They're almost like shamed and embarrassing for men. But maybe what you do is you're like, let's pick out a sex toy for you to try. What looks good for you that you're like, I think that would feel good. I don't necessarily have any interest in it, but let's try it because maybe it'll be amazing. It's about staying open and curious and asking the questions and getting to know people because we all change. I read an article once that like you're actually dating somebody new like every 5 to 7 years because we change so much throughout our lifetime and evolve that it's like you get an opportunity to relearn and redate and recommit to your relationship each and every time enough time goes by for us to get to know who this new person is and who they're becoming and really appreciate that evolution for them.
I love it. I love it. And I love interviewing guests on the podcast because whatever they're telling or saying, I'm like trying to apply it to my own life or try to like have a better relationship with my husband. You know, like you can never stop working on the relationship you have with somebody. It's not like just because you're boyfriend and girlfriend now or you're married that, okay, everything goes out the window. You don't have to try as hard anymore. You know, it's like
That is not
you
true.
actually do, like you said, like
Try harder.
sex was easy at the beginning and then now it does get harder, you know? So yeah, I love it. I love
Especially
it.
as you get in the minutia of things. And something you said brought up a thought for me that I think is really sweet is like remembering to have the dating in your life, like continue dating people, your person throughout your marriage or throughout your long-term relationship. So, and finding ways to incorporate small sexual intimacy, like maybe you take a shower together and you're like, let me wash your back. Or let
Mhm.
me wash your hair, or like, let me just like rub some soap on your body. And it doesn't have to lead to sex. That's another thing is like the pressure that goes into having sex. Like if my partner is making out with me, oftentimes people, or if you're making out, oftentimes people think it's going to automatically escalate to sex. And that puts pressure and then it pulls you out of the headspace and you can't be present with your partner because maybe you're not in the mood to have sex, but you're really enjoying this makeout session like you were in high school. Or maybe you just make out in the backseat of your car, even if you're 60 some years old, like you are in high school. Like just find fun ways to incorporate this and take the pressure off. It's okay to have a makeout session without it leading to sex. It's okay to give someone a massage or to have a shower or to just cuddle and have skin to skin. Like skin to skin is not just for babies and parents. It's very much for us adults as well. It's immediate calming of your vagus nervous system. So there are so many things that you can do. Think back to when you were in high school. Like what were the fun things spicy things you used to do then? Can you start applying that to your life now? Do you want to go under the bleachers and have a makeout session? Like who cares how old you are? Who cares? You think it's about instilling that fun into your relationship.
That's great. That's great. Well, Christina, thank you so much for joining me today. How would someone get in touch with you or work with you? What kind of clients are you looking for if they want to work with you?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So you can go to my website, ChristinaMorelliCoaching.com. I'm also very active on Facebook. If you find me again, everything is Christina Morelli Coaching. So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and my website. The type of clients I'm looking for are people who are really committed to doing the work that is required, who want to actually learn the formulas that can help you set you up for a really successful relationship. Or if you are in a relationship currently, like how can my partner and I get on the same page to continue to progress and grow a relationship in a very expansive way, not, declining, but we want to incline and grow together and continue to have those big wins as a team. There's
And
so
I
much
remember,
beauty in relationships.
yeah, I remember at the beginning of the show, you said that this is such an important part of our lives, yet we never went to school for it, right? Like just because
Mhm.
you go to college and you try to get a career and you try to be successful in life, at least college kind of helped you prepare for that. But we really didn't have any classes to take to prepare us to be a good partner in a relationship. So there's nothing bad about getting help or getting advice and get some coaching so you can
Yes.
have a better thriving relationship. So thank you so much, Christina,
Thank
for
you so
joining me on the
much.
show. And if you are single out there and you want to get some help from Christina, please contact her. I will put all of her info in the show notes. And of course, if you are looking for a lovely Asian partner, please contact me at 2asianmatchmakers.com. And I will talk to you guys later. Thank you.
Thank you.